So far, we've only been looking at right-angled triangles. The next two rules apply to any triangle. So we're now going to be looking at the rules for trigonometry that apply to non-right-angled triangles. Now, I've used the heading Advanced Trigonometry. Advanced Trigonometry doesn't mean that the maths is difficult. The advanced part basically means that you have to recognize these types of questions when you see them on an exam paper. They're not going to be at the beginning of a paper, they're going to be somewhere in the middle going towards the end. There are two rules for working with triangles which are not right-angled triangles. The first rule is called the cosine rule. And the cosine rule is nothing more than a formula. And it's this formula here that you have. A squared equals b squared plus c squared minus 2bc cos a. It looks like a mouthful, but you are going to be given this formula in the formula sheet. So a squared equals b squared plus c squared minus 2bc cos a. That formula is going to be given on the formula sheet. So don't try to memorize it straight away. Just look at the formula sheet and you're going to be able to copy it down from the formula sheet. You may notice, just looking at this formula, before we go into it, that the first bit, the a squared plus b squared plus c squared, looks very, very similar to Pythagoras' theorem. It's not Pythagoras' theorem, it's a modification to Pythagoras' theorem. Now, there are two things that you can do with this cosine rule. You can use the cosine rule as it stands to calculate a length, or you can use the cosine rule to calculate an angle. And we're going to look at both. So how do you go about using this formula, a squared equals b squared plus c squared minus 2bc cos a, to calculate a length? You need to look at the question. Now, in order to use this formula, this is the information that you are going to have to look for in the question. You need to be given two lengths in the triangle, and you need to be given the angle in between those two lengths. Now, if you see that in an exam question, the chances are they are going to ask you to calculate a length using this cosine rule formula. So a typical question will look like this. Let's say that we have a triangle PQR. We're told that the angle here at P is 60 degrees. And we're given these two lengths, 8 meters and 10 meters. And the question will ask us, calculate the length Q to R. Now, it's very, very important that you label the sides properly. Now, because this is not a right-angled triangle, you cannot use hype, op, and edge. You have to use the little letters A, B, and C to label the sides of the triangle. And it's very, very easy to do. This formula, as I said, may look complicated, but it's actually very, very simple. The way that you label the sides is you start by labeling the little a first. The length A is the length opposite the angle that you're using in the formula, or the angle that you're going to use to calculate the length. So the 60 degrees looks at the length little a. Now that will be the length that you're asked to calculate. Q to R in this case is this length here, and that's the length we want to work out, and that's what we're going to call little a. But the important thing is that length A is the length opposite the angle that you're using. In this case, it's the length that the 60-degree angle looks at. The other two sides of your triangle, you're going to call one of them B, and you're going to call the other one C. Now, it doesn't matter which length you call B and which length you call C. So you can interchange the C and the B. You have to get the position of A correct though. So A is always the length which is directly opposite the angle. Once you've labelled the sides of your triangle, all you then need to do is to replace into this formula the lengths from your labelled triangle. So you write it down exactly as you have it written down here in the formula. So we're trying to work out a squared. So we're going to write a squared equals. We're going to replace the b here in the formula with the 8 meters. Plus, we're then going to replace the c here with the 10 meters from the diagram, squared, minus 2. And then we got this b here in the formula. So the b here in this formula is basically the 8 meters again. So we're going to replace that b with 8 in a bracket. And then the c here in the formula is the length of 10 meters in the triangle. So we're going to replace that c with 10. And then we have this cos A. Now, cos A refers to the angle. So we then have to write cos, and then the angle is going to be that 60 degrees. Now, once we've written down this piece of working, this is your method mark, basically. All you have to do is just retype this into your calculator exactly as you've written it down here. So our next line of working will be a squared equals, and if I bring up the calculator, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to type this into my calculator exactly as I've written it down. So open a bracket, 8 close bracket squared plus open bracket 10 close bracket squared minus, and then I've got the 2, 8, 10 and cos 60 coming after that. So 2 open bracket, 8 close bracket, and then 10 in its own bracket, and then at the end don't forget to put the cos 60 and then close the bracket at the end, and I get a value of 84. So I now know that a is going to be, or rather a squared is going to be 84. That's the value for a squared. There's one more little thing you need to do. To get a, we then need to take the square root of that 84. So if I now take the square root of 84, so I can clear that, square root and then 84 equals, I get my value. And that's going to be 9.17 meters to 2 decimal places. And that is the length of Q2R. That's the length that I wanted to calculate, and that's the final answer. The second thing you can do with the cosine rule is use the cosine rule to calculate an angle in a triangle. Now, in order to work out the angle in a triangle, you need to be given all 3 lengths in the triangle. So when you're looking at an exam question, if the question gives you a triangle and it gives you all 3 lengths, the chances are they want you to work out an angle, and in order to do that, you need to use the rearranged cosine rule, which looks like this. Now, this formula here, cos A equals b squared plus c squared minus a squared all over 2bc, is the same as the formula above. A squared equals b squared plus c squared minus 2bc cos A. All we've done is we've rearranged that formula to give us this formula for working out an angle. Now, I'll show you how to rearrange this formula later on, but for the time being, you'll just need to learn it or use your notes when you're doing the questions to copy the formula down. The most important thing for the time being is how you actually go about using this formula to calculate an angle in any triangle that you're given. So a typical question will be similar to this. You're going to be given a triangle. Let's call it KLM. And you're asked to calculate an angle. So let's say that we want to calculate this angle X. So the question will be calculate x degrees. And you're going to be given all three lengths in the triangle. So they'll tell you that L to M will be, say, 15 meters. K to L will be, say, 7 meters. And K to M, let's make that 10 meters. So the first thing you need to recognize is that in this question, we've been given all three lengths of the triangle. 7 meters, 15 meters, and 10 meters. As before, the most important thing that you need to do is label the sides A, B, and C. And it's very straightforward and similar to what you did before. The length of the angle you're trying to work out looks at is always what you call little a in that formula. That is really the important length. So the little a is the length which is directly opposite the angle you're trying to work out. The other two lengths in the triangle, we're going to call them B and C. And again, it doesn't really matter which length we call B and which length we call C. So we could interchange the B and the C if we want. But you have to make sure that you get the A in the right place. Once you've labeled the sides, you then have to basically put those lengths into this formula here. So remember, the capital letter A here represents the angle that you're trying to work out. So if I just go ahead and put the numbers in, well, cos A will basically be written cos X because that's what I'm trying to work out. On the top, I'm going to put my fraction line in first. On the top, I've got b squared plus c squared minus a squared. So we know that b is equal to 7. So 7 squared. We know that c is equal to 10 meters. So plus 10 squared. Minus, and the a is that 15 meters. So minus 15 squared. And at the bottom we have 2bc, or 2 times b times c. So on the bottom, we're going to have 2, open a bracket, and we know that b is equal to 7. Open another bracket, we know that c is equal to 10. And that's our substitution completed. So this is the bit of working that you actually need to show. Once you've got this written down, you're then going to type this exactly into the calculator as you've written it. So we're just typing in the left-hand side. So what we write down next is cos x equals, I'm going to bring the calculator up, and on the top, well, I need to enter a fraction, so I'm going to press the fraction button first, and then I'm going to enter the top, open a bracket, 7, close bracket squared, plus, and then open bracket 10 squared, minus 15 in a bracket squared. I'm going to go down, and then at the bottom I'm going to have 2, open bracket 7, open bracket, open bracket 10, and I get this value of minus 0.54285, etc. Now, it looks incorrect, but that's actually the correct answer. So I'm just going to write this down to, let's say, 4 decimal places. Now, it is the correct answer, but what you have to remember is that this value that you've got here is the cos of x. It's not x. It's not the angle. It's the cos of the angle. Now, the opposite of cos is inverse cos. So what we need to do is we then need to take the inverse cos of that value. So the next line of working will be x equals cos to the minus 1. Now, instead of having to rewrite this value again into the calculator, there's a button at the bottom of your calculator, the A and S button, which I'll show you how to use in a second. So if I press Shift, cos, and then I press answer and close bracket, I get a value of 122.878 degrees. So x, the angle that I want, is going to be 122.9 degrees to 1 decimal place. So that's how you work out an angle in any triangle. You need to be given all three lengths in the triangle in order to be able to work out an angle. Before I go into the sine rule, I'm going to go through two examples of using the cosine rule. One example for calculating a length, as in the first example that we did here using this formula, and the second worked example, how we would go about calculating an angle using this formula. So the examples I'm going to be looking at are typical exam questions that you're going to come across. The following two examples are exam questions that you're going to encounter. The first thing to note is read the question carefully to understand what information you're actually given. You're given two lengths and you're given the angle between those two lengths in a non-right angle triangle. And if you notice, the length that you're asked to calculate, in this case x, is the length which is directly opposite the angle that you're given. In this case, it's the angle the 117 degrees looks at. You can't use SOHCAHTOA because it's not a right angle triangle. So the information you're given and what you need to recognize is that you're given two lengths and you're given the angle between those two lengths. And that's going to tell you that you need to use the cosine rule to work out the length of x. And the cosine rule you grab from the formula sheet is a squared equals b squared plus c squared minus 2bc cos x. That's the cosine rule used to calculate a length. And that's what you're going to get in the formula sheet. Now, before we start to put numbers into this formula, we need to label the sides A, B, and C. Now, remembering from the lesson, the length which the angle looks at is always the length we call little a. So the x degree, the x centimeters, is opposite the 117 degree angle. That is the length that we call little a. The other two lengths we're going to call B and C respectively. We then simply replace the B and the C, the given lengths, and the angle 117 degrees into the cosine rule formula. Remember, we're trying to work out little a. So our next stage in the working, we do the substitution. A squared equals, B is 5.2, so 5.2 squared. C is 6.7, so 6.7 in a bracket squared, minus 2, and then B and then C. So again, the B is 5.2 in its own bracket, and the C is the 6.7, which goes in its own bracket, cos 117. Once we've written that, this is the working that you need to show the examiner. You type in the right-hand side of this equation. So you type in the whole of the right-hand side into your calculator. So let me clear this off. So what we have is we're going to open a bracket, 5.2 close bracket squared plus 6.7 squared. We're going to type the whole thing in one go into the calculator. So we then put minus 2, open a bracket, we replace the B with 5.2, and then we have the 6.7, close bracket, and finally we have cos of the angle, which is 117 degrees, 117, close brackets. That gives us a value of 103.56. So A is going to be equal to 103.564. Sorry, A squared rather. Now, the last thing we have to do, we need to get A on its own, so we have to take the square root of this value. So our next line of working is we're going to take the square root of that 103.564. We can again use the answer button on the calculator, so we can just type in square root answer, which takes the previous value and puts it in. And that gives us a value for A of 10.16 or 10.2. So A is going to be equal to 10.2, and the units are going to be centimeters to three significant figures. And that's how you calculate a length using the cosine rule. Again, look at the wording that you're going to get in an exam question. These questions tend to be fairly straightforward. You just need to recognize the information that's given to you. So if you want to work out a length using the cosine rule, you need to be given two lengths, in this case the 5.2 and the 6.7, and more importantly, you need to be given the angle in between those two lengths. That's what you're looking for in the exam question. If we look at the next example, the question is asking us to calculate angle x. We're given a non-right angle triangle. So immediately you know that you cannot use SOHCAHTOA to actually work this out. We're not dealing with a right angle triangle. You have to look and see what information you're given in the question. And the first thing that you should notice is that you're given all three lengths. So we have all three lengths given to us in the question, and we're asked to work out an angle x. The fact that we're given all three lengths is extremely indicative that you have to use the cosine rule to work out this angle. Now, the cosine rule for working out an angle, or the rearranged cosine rule, is cos x equals b squared plus c squared minus a squared all over 2bc. There will be a separate video on how to get this formula from the cosine rule that's given to you in the formula sheet. But for the time being, we're not worried too much about this, and we're just going to accept this rearranged formula as the one that we need. Labeling the sides is extremely important. The little a is the length opposite the angle that we're trying to calculate. So in this case, because we're trying to calculate x, the length which that angle looks at, in this case it's the 7 centimeters, is what we're going to call little a. The other two lengths are going to be called b and c, but again, it doesn't really matter which length we call b and which length we call c. We could interchange these. All we're going to do is simply put these values, these lengths, a, b, and c, into the formula for the cosine rule. So cos x stays where it is because that's what we're trying to work out. We're going to write our fraction sign in. And then on the top, we're going to replace the b with the 9 centimeters, or just 9 squared. We're going to replace the c here with 13 in a bracket squared. We're then going to replace the a here with the 7 centimeters, or the 7 squared, all over 2, and then at the bottom we got b again, which is 9, and then we got c again, which is the 13, and that's our substitution done. All we then have to do is just type in the right-hand side of this equation. We're just typing in the right-hand side into the calculator because we're trying to work out cos x. So we just need to get the calculator up. We've seen it, so if I just clear everything off, the first thing I need to do is I need to press the fraction button, AB, and on the top, open a bracket. We're going to have 9 in a bracket squared plus in a bracket 13, close bracket squared, minus, and then we've got that 7 in a bracket squared. And then if we go down, we're going to have 2, and then 9, close bracket, and then 13, close bracket. And we've done the substitution using brackets. We get a value of 0.858974. and that is the value of x. It may look like it's incorrect because it's a decimal, but what you need to remember is that what you just worked out is the value for cos x. To get x, you then have to take the inverse cos of that answer. So that's the bit that you have to remember. So if we take the inverse cos of 0.85897, so if I use the answer button and then close the bracket, I'm going to get 30.8 degrees to 1 decimal place, and that is the angle that we wanted. So the answer to this question is that x is going to be equal to 30.8 degrees to 1 decimal place, or 3 significant figures. Just to end up on, if you want to use the cosine rule to calculate a length, the information that you need to look for in the question, you need to be given all 3 lengths. If you see a triangle with all 3 lengths given to you, it's a big clue that you have to use the cosine rule in this format to calculate the angle.